my pleasure to It is my pleasure to welcome back Dr. J.R. Green, Superintendent of Fairfield County School District. Since 2012, under Dr. Green's leadership, Fairfield County School District, in partnership with families and communities, strives to prepare students with world-class knowledge, world-class skills, and life and career choices by providing a comprehensive, innovative, and rigorous curriculum that fosters lifelong learners in a global society. Prior to joining Fairfield County School District, he served as an assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction for Chesterfield County School District. He spent several years as the principal of Central High School in Pageland, South Carolina, after serving as both an assistant high school principal and as a teacher. Dr. Green strongly believes he is purposed to work with and to inspire young people. He exhibits that belief through his mentoring initiative, the Griffin Bowtie Club. Under the leadership of Dr. Green, the Fairfield County School District became the first community to enter into a partnership with the University of South Carolina. The Accelerator for Learning and Leadership for South Carolina, all for SC, marshals resources from the entire university in order to address the serious challenges facing South Carolina's highest need school communities. Recognizing the importance of a community partnership, Dr. Green led the effort to establish the Fairfield County School District Foundation. In keeping with community partnerships, Dr. Green was instrumental in reestablishing the Fairfield County Hall of Fame. Dr. Green holds a Bachelor of Science, a Master's of Art, a Master's of Education, and a Doctorate in Educational Leadership degrees from University of South Carolina. A Raleigh Leadership Institute Fellow, Dr. Green is involved in several civic and professional organizations. A native South Carolinian, Dr. Green currently resides in Winsboro with his wife Tanya and daughters Jamara, Janelle, and Josiah. He impresses upon students that education is the foundation of their future. Dr. Green leaves quite a lasting impression on others and enriches the lives with his noble deeds. His philosophy is simple: do your best. So Dr. Green joined us last year and definitely left us with a lasting impression. So we asked him to come back this year. So without further ado, Dr. J.R. Green.
Good afternoon. As you said a minute ago, you invited me on last year and invited me back this year. So that must mean I did not embarrass myself and must have represented myself and my family in the Fairfield County District at least moderately well. And so it is a pleasure to be with you again doing this very, very meaningful convening. You know, we think about the value and the importance of, and I'll use the words that you use right now, engaging families. It is absolutely vital to the success of any educational institution. You absolutely cannot achieve the mission without the engagement of our families and our communities. As was stated earlier, I am the superintendent of schools in Fairfield County. I am into my 11th year as superintendent here. And I jokingly tell people that you kind of measure superintendent years like dog years. And so really I am the equivalent of about 72 years old because this job tends to churn them out very quickly. But it has been an absolute pleasure to be in Fairfield County. You know, since I had a conversation with you on last year, this is going to be somewhat of a follow-up conversation from what I shared on last year. And I'm going to give you some additional things to think about. And first of all, I'm going to get out of my lane a little bit, as I did on last time, and really challenge us to think about the theme. You know, this year's theme is connecting schools and communities, championing family engagement. Championing family engagement. And I want us to really think about family engagement and really what that means, and is that really what we're looking for. I said this on last year, that I assert that what we really need to shift our thinking to is family support, not necessarily engagement. And engagement is good, but as I told someone earlier today, engagement without capacity means very little. Engagement without adequate resources means very little. And so simply saying that we want our parents to show up to school report card pickup, we want them to show up to grandparents' day, we want them to show up to school improvement council meetings and all the various activities, folks, I think it's simply not going to be enough for us to truly move the needle. The reality is that many of our young people who exhibit the most struggles come from families that exhibit the most struggles. And if we're going to change the trajectory of those young people that we serve, then we're going to have to figure out how we change the trajectory of the families that are there to support our young people. In addition, we're going to have to look beyond simply the families with which those children come from. We're going to have to make it an even broader effort. And so that's why we have to always recognize the value of community support. You see, to simply put all the onus on a family that may struggle and not have the capacity to really change that trajectory is really expecting something that's really, it's not realistic. And so our families are going to have to be supported by our communities. And so we can no longer sit back and say, well, mamas and daddies, you got to do a better job. Uncles and aunts, you have to do a better job. Guess what, folks? We all have to do a better job. We all have to take responsibility for the trajectory of our young people. You know, this whole phrase that people have been using for years, that it takes a village to raise a child, I truly believe that. I'm not sure, rather, we believe that, but I believe that. And I think that once we really begin to embrace that, we'll see some significant changes. Now, let's think about parent engagement versus parent support. And let's think about exactly what that means. You know, if I asked you all to do this on last year, I said, what I want you to do is, I want you to put in the chat the characteristics that tend to lead to a successful student. You did an excellent job. You gave me a whole bunch of excellent characteristics that I would agree with. But I'm asking you a different question this year. Okay, and I want you to put it in the chat, and I'm gonna share a few things. I want you to put in the chat the characteristics that you observe for students who experience the most struggles in our systems. I want you to put the characteristics that you observe with students that have the most discipline issues. I want you to put the characteristics of the students that experience the most academic challenges. I want you to put down the characteristics of students who have the biggest, most difficult times really, immersing themselves into exactly what occurs within our system. And I'm gonna share a few of those. So, contrary to what we did last year, when we talked about the characteristics of a successful student, I want you to put in there the characteristics of students who are having the most struggles in our system. And I tell you, I'm already seeing some of the things that I'm not surprised by. I'm seeing a little family support, and I'm seeing trauma, and I'm seeing anger issues and language barriers. I'm seeing economic issues, lack of parental support, broken families, lack of engaging curriculum, untrusting schools and educators. And folks, guess what? I think we acknowledge that all of those things are very accurate. but I'm gonna challenge us to really think about how successful can we be in isolation, changing the trajectory of the things that you just identified. You know, we are going to have to accept the reality, and I said this the last time I spoke, that schools cannot do it alone. You know, Jamie Vollmer wrote a book about 12 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, where he talked about that schools can't do it alone. And as much as we try, we are going to have to solicit the support of many other partners, to include partners in the community and include partners in homes. And when those partners in homes don't have the capacity to really support us to the extent that we know we need them, then we are going to have to provide them greater support. I was sharing with Ms. Thurman earlier that in Fairfield County, we have what we call a homeless closet. And it's not necessarily just for homeless students or homeless families. It's for families in need. And it's not just a closet. I mean, it's a whole building. And it has underwear and it has socks and t-shirts and jeans and couches and TVs and kitchen furniture. And so some people say, well, why would you have couches and TVs and kitchen furniture? The reality is that we are going to provide the support that we recognize many families may need. That may involve helping a family to get a bed. Okay, I mean, that may involve helping a family to get a kitchen table. I mean, that may involve helping a kid who is struggling with his hygiene because they don't have enough clothes in the rotation to get some additional clothes. And so I'm going to go back to this whole idea of support for families and not simply the engagement of families. I'm going to tell you a quick story. And this happened just this week, but I met with a grandmother earlier this week. And this grandmother was at the district office because she had an expulsion hearing. And I had mentioned that I wanted to see the grandmother sometime either before or after the hearing. So after the hearing, grandmother came to see me and she brought her 7th grade daughter with her. And she was here on expulsion hearing because of a physical assault that was perpetrated by a granddaughter. And I've had a conversation with grandmother a couple of years back, but at that time, my conversation was about a house fire that they had. And they were really struggling, really kind of in a state of homelessness. But during this follow-up conversation I had with grandmother, grandmother shared with me that her daughter, her granddaughter, was still struggling with the emotional trauma of her father passing most recently. When I say recently, it had been a couple of years. And she was still struggling with the trauma that the mother, and I can't remember whether the mother had passed, but the mother was not present in her life. And so grandmother was really who was there to raise this particular granddaughter and her sibling. And I'll tell you, grandmother, which was obvious in my conversation with her, had some health challenges. So here it is, a relatively elderly grandmother is charged with raising 2 children who have been scarred with some emotional baggage as a function of losing their parents. Also being challenged with the reality of within a couple of years ago, being a victim of a house fire that left them in a virtually homeless situation. And we're talking about how we changed the trajectory of her granddaughter. Now, the reason I wanted to have a conversation with the grandmother was because I realized that grandmother needed greater support than she was getting. I recognized that grandmother had all the will in the world to see her daughter, her granddaughter, be successful. But because of a multitude of reasons, grandmother didn't truly have all the resources and the adequate capacity to really change the trajectory. And so the question is, how do we respond to that? I mean, we can simply sit back and talk about how these children need to be in greater supportive environments. But the question is, what do we do to ensure that a greater supportive environment does exist? And so me and grandmother had some very heart conversations about some things that needed to happen differently. And I wanted to be there for grandmother to really talk about what we could do as a system to really give her greater capacity. Because if we're honest with ourselves, if we do not change the dynamics that exist in that home, the likelihood that we change the dynamic that exists once this young lady gets to us to be educated is very, very slim. That is a sobering reality that unfortunately we have to confront. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to be woe is me, but we have to acknowledge that unless we are prepared to begin in this whole journey of supporting families, we are going to have a difficult time supporting our young people. Now, you know, folks on this call probably telling me we didn't sign up for all of that, JR. Okay, it's up to families to support young people, and it's up to us to support students. Well, folks, you signed up for the wrong profession, if that's what you think. Because the reality is we are going to have to do more unless we are okay with the results that we are getting. You know, as someone said, and several people said there, you are going over all of those characteristics that exist with students that are struggling. We not only see that in South Carolina, we see that across the country. And it's up to us to figure out what we do to change some of those dynamics. It is going to force us to ask a very, very real question. Whose responsibility is it to support families? See, often we say, whose responsibility is it to support young people? But I'm going to ask you, whose responsibility is it to support families? Because I assert that supporting families is supporting young people. I'm going to go back again. I'm not talking about engagement, folks. I'm not talking about people coming to the family night. I'm not talking about coming to report card pickup. Okay. I'm talking about family support. So engagement, we're going to put that on the shelf for a minute, and we're going to make this about support. And so I asked the question, whose responsibility is it to support families? Now, we have a part to play in that as institutions of learning, but so does the community. And that's a message that we are going to have to take out of our respective buildings, in churches, in businesses, in civic organizations, in county councils and city councils. It is a message that we are going to have to take out of our schools to say, it is going to have to be our responsibility to support families. So it's not only going to be about supporting children, because I understand that indirect connection to supporting families and the success of the young people that we are serving. We have a lot of conversations, as I said during our my last presentation in Fairfield County, around two concepts: whole child education and community schooling. And you know, whole child education has tenets, and I shared what the tenets of whole child education are, that each student needs to be healthy, each student needs to feel safe, each student needs to be actively engaged in his or her learning and connected to his or her school. Each student needs to be supported by a qualifying and caring adult, and each student needs to be challenged academically and prepared for success. Some of that we have the capacity to do merely by ourselves, okay? But a lot of that, we are going to have to call on partners within our communities and call on the people who are most close to these young people, who are there with them each and every day, who help to support what we are doing, which are those families. And where we observe and recognize that these families are having struggles. You all just told me a minute ago, the students who are experiencing the most struggles generally come from homes that are experiencing the most struggle. And so since we acknowledge that, the question is, what are we going to be prepared to do about it? That's why I like this concept of community schooling. You know, whole child education says that, well, we have to recognize that there's so many facets to a young person being successful. And just like that story I gave you, where this young lady was recommended for expulsion, and I talked about some of the emotional scars that resulted as a function of her father passing, that's something we got to deal with. You know, when I talk about the fact that her grandmother and they had a house fire and they were homeless, that's something we got to deal with. You know, I talk about the fact that her grandmother has some health challenges, which probably prohibits her from being as mobile and as engaged as she probably would be. That's something that we have to deal with, folks. And the question is, who is going to be prepared to do that? And that's this whole idea about community schooling comes into play, that says that we all have to rally around all the young people and all the families that are struggling in our community. And to simply sit there and look at it and say, mama, daddies, y'all got to do a better job, does nothing for us. You know, recently we had a rash of shootings in Fairfield County. And I thought about it, and we weren't having things happen in school, but we were having things happen in the community. And as I said, when people said, well, JR, why are you so involved in that? I reminded them the same young people that we serve in the Fairfield County School District, they going back home in those communities. And so how can I be concerned about what goes on when they're in school and not be concerned about what happens to them when they walk out of my building? So I called a meeting of the sheriff, of the police chief, the town manager, the county council administrator, the county administrator, several other law enforcement individuals. And I said, well, what are we going to do to address this issue of violence in our community? And it's not going to be enough for us to say, well, parents, y'all need to know where your young people are when they leave home and why they out at 2 o'clock in the morning. And you got to do a better job doing this. You got a better job, need to do a better job doing that. The question, what are we going to do to change the trajectory of what's going on right now in our community? And we brainstormed some things that we could do to stem the tide of that violence. But what I was most impressed with was that we had a community group that observed what was going on. The community group was called Love Never Fails. And so what Love Never Fails said is that we are going to, first of all, they asked me, well, Superintendent, you know, we got to get involved. We got to do some things to change what's going on with violence in our community. And I want to make this connection once again, folks. When we talk about young people being successful in schools, that we got to acknowledge the things that happen in their communities. You know, we start talking about young people doing better read, write, and arithmetic. We got to acknowledge the reality of what happens in their community. We want to start talking about not getting in trouble and fussing and fighting and doing things in school. You have to acknowledge what happens in the community. And so what Love Never Fails said is, Superintendent, we want you to give us, let us use a couple of activity buses. And we want to take those activity buses and we want to tour the community to really appeal to the people within those communities to help be a part of the solution to really change this youth violence that's occurring in our community. And not only to have conversations with mamas and daddies who are there, but to have also conversations with neighbors and uncles and aunts and just people who live in the community. because we can't simply sit back and say somebody else needs to do it. As I often tell people, if not you, then who? If not you, then who? So let's not sit back and wait on someone else. And I couldn't make the first trip that they had, but I was able to make the second trip that they had. And so I got on the bus and we went to a couple of apartment complexes, and they had paid someone who has an ice cream truck to set up in the respective communities that we went to. And children came screaming out of these apartment complexes to get free ice cream. And guess what? Mamas and daddies came screaming out to get some free ice cream as well. And neighbors who might not have had any children came out as well. And we had an opportunity to have some conversations about what we needed to do to change the trajectory in our community. We had an opportunity to tell some of those families who otherwise might not have heard it, is that we care about you, we love you, we respect you, and we want to be there. We want to be there for you. And so a perfect example of the community accepting a bit of responsibility for the things that occur within the community, even if it doesn't impact someone who is directly related to you. You know, Fairfield County is a part of many school districts that are participating in what we call a Be Smart campaign. And this campaign is designed to educate the public around securing firearms. Not a debate about the Second Amendment, but simply saying, if there is a gun present, let's not leave it in a car so someone can come and steal it. Let's not have it in your sock drawer so a young person can go in there and take it. Let's secure the firearms that we have, because that is directly connected to the violence that often occurs in our community. You know, a law enforcement will tell you that most of the guns that end up on the streets, that end up in the hands of young people, are stolen guns. Stolen out of someone's car, stolen out of someone's house, not locked up, don't have trigger locks on them, and we're being a bit careless in how we secure these firearms. So the Be Smart campaign said that we got to do a better job. So not only is the community group being engaged in what we can do to improve the trajectory of our young people, we get law enforcement involved, we're getting civic organizations involved, we're getting churches involved, we're getting Joe Q public involved, because we have to provide a greater level of support to the people who are there to support young people. I'm running out of time, so I'm gonna have to wrap it up here soon. But you know, I had a Facebook interaction with someone from the community, and I don't typically engage on Facebook, but every now and then something is said that I feel compelled to address. And what happened? We had a tragic situation where a young person who was, and I say young person, he was 24 years old, who shot and killed another young person who was 21 years old in our community. And this person put on Facebook, I'm gonna read you what they said, and it bothered me a bit, and then I'm gonna tell you why I feel that it's important that I share. But and some of you're gonna say, what is she talking about? But she said, our county is in a state of crisis, and it's all related. If you look at the animal shelter, they're at double the triple capacity, crates on top of crates and hallways and bathrooms. Why? Because it starts at home and having decency to respect a life. There is no family structure or anyone held accountable for their actions, and that behavior breeds bad humans. Let me say that one more time. That jumped out at me. She said that behavior breeds bad humans. Then kids grow up seeing how easy it is to throw away a life, and it's not a big deal to them. This young man is not a kid, but I bet he didn't grow up in a good situation. He's going to be held accountable for the first time in his life. I'm not sure how she knew that, but that's what she said. And now it's too late. We need to fix so many parts of our community so that kids behind him have something to encourage a change. And you know, first of all, I emailed her and said I take exception with several of the things that you said. First of all, humans don't breed, dogs breed. So I don't know what you're talking about breeding. And I don't know about any bad humans. We don't have any bad humans. We have people who tend to make mistakes in life, just as you have made several in your life. But furthermore, I want to know, tell me what you are willing to do to be a part of making change in our community. As a matter of fact, this is my number. Give me a call. I ain't heard from her yet. This is probably 3 weeks ago, maybe 4. And it's easy for people to talk about what the problems are, but you don't want to be a part of what the solutions could be. Now, this person doing a lot of talking, but isn't saying anything as far as I'm concerned. Okay. As the young people say, don't talk me to death. Don't talk about it. You got to be about it. And so if we want to see change in our community, we have to be willing to be a part of the change that we say we want to see. When we talk about some of the challenges that exist in our community, you're right, folks. It's going to take us to get down and dirty to really support our families so they can better support our young people. You know, folks, let's remember a quote that I know many of you educators have heard for years. Kids don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. But guess what? Parents don't care how much you know either until they know how much you care. And you can't help someone that you don't care about. So I want us to really reflect on this whole idea of support versus engagement. And I know I am on a call with people who care. I know I'm on a call with people who want to change the trajectory of young people, but we simply need to have a paradigm shift where we aren't necessarily looking for people to come in our doors, but we're willing to go out to where they are and we're willing to do what is necessary to support them. I have a brother who's a pastor, and I always tell him, well, if y'all just wait for people to come into church, you're going to be waiting forever and you're not having much of an impact. We got to be willing to go out and do some outreach ministry. And so this is a part of what we are doing as institutions, is some outreach ministry to really support families so they can support our young people. I think I'm about 2 minutes over. I think 2:30 was my ending time. As always, it has been a pleasure to join you here today. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to address them, but I apologize for going a little bit over.
We appreciate your being here and we appreciate your message. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure.